This is not exactly the first service I was anticipating in my mind's eye as I was imagining this day for months and months. But sometimes what you imagine seems like a disappointment, but actually turns out to be better than what you imagined. So let us hold that in our hearts. See, I am sending my messenger to prepare a way before you, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. So starts the reading we heard from the prophet Malachi. Malachi speaks about a messenger, one who is sent before me. Me in this particular context is God. Initially, the identity of this messenger is not stated, but later, in a later chapter, it is identified as Elijah. So there was apparently this belief that Elijah was going to come back in the future as an important part of God's unfolding plan. And the gospel writers take this idea up, starting with Mark. For them, and they all have little ways, differences on how they view things, but basically Elijah is coming back, and Elijah is identified as John the Baptist. For Malachi, Elijah was coming back to the temple, following by the coming of God into the temple. So the Lord is coming to the temple. That's basically what Malachi is talking about. And this is a great event. Now, of course, the Lord's always at the temple because the Lord's everywhere, but there's a special presence, a special being there, if you will, that Malachi is imagining. So there's something for Malachi. This is a fearful event. This is a big deal, something to be a little intimidated about. He writes, he asks the people, who can endure the day of his coming, and who can stand when this God appears? He's basically telling the people, don't be too sure about your standing with God. Don't be too sure that you and God are buddies. I don't know if anyone saw the movie, what's it called? Dogma. It has the buddy Jesus. Does anyone know the buddy Jesus? Anyways, it's the Catholic Church is wanting to rebrand Jesus because the cross is just too serious and heavy. And so they want to come up with the buddy Jesus, who's just your pal, your drinking buddy, basically. And unfortunately, while that's, of course, satire, sometimes our understanding of Jesus is a little bit close to being just a buddy Jesus. Jesus is a big deal. According to Malachi, God will appear at the temple as a fire. You know, of course, we know what's going on down in LA with fires. They can be devastating. So fires, fire can be in controlled environment, can make for a good life. You can cook, you can do all sorts of, you can heat in the snow. But when it gets out of control, it's dangerous. So being on God's team is not something that we boast about as if we're better than other people. So that's Malachi's understanding of God's coming to the temple. This big, huge, scary thing. Luke also has an understanding of God, or the Lord, coming to the temple. And his vision is rather different from Malachi's. The Lord does come in the baby Jesus to the temple, and I would argue that he does come in power, but not in a power that we recognize. Rather, the Lord appears in the temple as a helpless baby. Now, there might be something intimidating about babies, but generally we don't fear them in the same way that we might a mighty ruler. We don't typically think of babies as beings of magnificent power and might. Babies depend on the goodwill of others to survive. They are fragile. We're all fragile, of course, but babies are especially fragile. Babies typically do not command expansive military troops, typically. They can't even get food for themselves. Yet, I believe this baby being presented in the temple actually gives us a better picture of what power is actually like. The power of God, which we sometimes imagine is like the mighty fires destroying Los Angeles, perhaps can be better understood as the power of a baby. Now, this might seem wrong or counterintuitive, might even seem blasphemous to some. But I think the problem is we imagine power, the power of God, as if it were just like human power, except way bigger. Human power is very often power over. I have power over you. I can get you to do what I want you to do. I can force you sometimes by force or coercion or what have you. And if you're truly powerless, you are helpless against me. So human power is often can be measured in domination. There's often winners and losers. For me to be strong, someone else has to be weak. This human power is dehumanizing, and it's belittling, it's destructive, and it's unjust. And if the power of God is like that, only way bigger, then we're all in really big trouble. But I believe the power of God is so different from human power that from a human perspective, it actually can be confused for weakness. God's power is the power of a baby. A baby has no force, no power to make you do what the baby wants you to do. It has no commands to issue. If the baby has an authority, it's the authority of human need. The baby needs to be fed. The baby needs shelter. So any commands that it issues is issued out of need and vulnerability, not raw power. So if God's power is like the power of a baby, then it's the power of vulnerability. Human power cannot risk showing vulnerability, but God's power is rooted in vulnerability. A baby reveals to us the beauty of existence, the thundering attractiveness of life. God is like a lover wooing you forward, trying to draw you in to herself. Human power is like someone with a whip, whipping you forward. Very, very different. God's power is the power of attraction that invites us into a deeper, richer, and more meaningful engagement with life and with our true selves. Human power often moves us away from our true selves into defensiveness or some other posture. Simeon sees this child and says that many will rise and fall because of their reaction to the child. Many will rise and fall because of what they think about this child. If they dare to accept this radical reorientation of what power is like, what divine power is like, they will rise. But if they insist upon their distorted notions of human power, they will fall. Now, it's not the child, actually, the way Simeon's little prophecy frames it. It's not the child, or even God, really, causing the rising or the falling. It's the thoughts themselves. It's the response to divine power, real divine power, that causes people to rise or fall. And it's almost as if you drop a rock, it has its own energy. It doesn't need me to force it down. It just has a logic built into it. So if you accept this power, this radical weakness, if you will, or this what looks to us like weakness, this uncharacteristic power, this total surprise, this power that is like no other power, it will elevate you. But again, if we insist upon our own understanding, then we're stuck in that. There's a fragile beauty, I believe, at the core of existence. And it's a vulnerable. It's more like a candle in a storm, or a butterfly than a strong mountain. It doesn't have this sense of impenetrable invulnerability. And we become fragile. We become ourselves, because we are fragile. We become vulnerable. And it's only in vulnerability that we get to know each other. If we're not vulnerable with each other, we're only showing each other the shells or our little power plays over each other. And vulnerability, the thing about vulnerability is you could be hurt. The power of this child does not remove suffering, at least not yet. Simeon tells Mary that a sword will pierce your soul too. This child, as is the case with all children, sorry, Alethea, is a source of pain and vulnerability for parents. Parents will worry about their children, no matter if they're 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 or whatever. It's an open spot. It's a vulnerability for parents. But Simeon insists that God is with us, to Mary, even in the pain. So it's the power. Human power is often about maybe giving pain to other people, but removing the pain for ourselves. Divine power isn't really about that. It's not wanting to inflict pain, of course, but life has pain, and a true engagement of life isn't going to turn away from that. So today, I'm really excited about being with you here at St. Thomas. May we all, in this new era, welcome the child of God into the temple of our own lives, into the temple of our own sanctuary here. Let us welcome the power of God, the real living, active power of God at the center of the universe that comes with this radical, childlike vulnerability. A power that's as fragile and gentle as a baby. May it be. Amen.